Welcome back to Goosebump on the Midnight series, where the most terrifying haunted stories are told. Today we will follow Ethan Tran, who has to be going back to his hometown, Tombstone Village. A place where even the name is enough to make people shiver, according to the mysterious will of his grandfather. He has to determine the fate of the ancestral manor on the hill, Moonwatch Manor. Please support the channel by like the video if you enjoyed it. Comment with your thoughts on the story and its ending. Share this video with your friends and family. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next thrilling horror story. Thank you all for listening. The last coach bus of the day crawled sluggishly out of the district station, carrying Ethan Tran and a heavy reluctance that filled his chest. The air inside the bus was suffocatingly close, thick with the sour stench of sweat from long journeys, the sharp odor of engine oil, and the distinct musty smell of worn-out felt seats soaked with dew and road dust. Ethan pulled aside the grimy window curtain, the fabric faded by sun and wind, and looked out. The late afternoon sun cast long, golden yellow rays, dyeing the harvested rice fields a withered yellow. The bare, scraggly stubble stretched to the distant horizon. A crisp autumn wind swept by, carrying wisps of dry straw and red dust. The scene should have been peaceful, imbued with the characteristic tranquility of a serene countryside, but to Ethan's eyes, it was just an endless stretch of boredom, a monotonous and dreary painting. He felt a strong resistance rising within him, a feeling of unwillingness, even hatred, at having to return to this place. Ethan had never wanted to come back to Tombstone Village. His memories of this place were just fragmented, faded pieces, like an old dream, the thick, earthy smell after a downpour, the ear-splitting chorus of insects that echoed through the summer nights, and above all, the stern face of his grandfather, Marcus Tran. It was a face he had never seen smile, not even for a moment, from his childhood until the day the old man died. His grandfather had always been an imposing, cold, and mysterious monument in Ethan's mind. And one more thing, something he could never forget, was his grandfather's absolute prohibition regarding the old villa on the hill. He always repeated that it was an unlucky place, a place where the Tran descendants were never allowed to go near. If it weren't for the crumpled, handwritten piece of paper in his pocket, a brutally short and cryptic will from his grandfather, Ethan probably would never have set foot in this place again, a place he had tried to bury deep in his memory, a place he believed had been completely erased from his mind. His grandfather's shaky, scrawled words, written in faded ink on yellowed paper, carried the cold breath of his final days and haunted Ethan. Ethan, my eldest grandson. You must return to Tombstone Village. The old family villa on the hill is yours to decide. Sell it, keep it, I don't care. But you must be the one to handle it. Consider this my final word. Tombstone Village. Even the name was enough to send a shiver down one's spine, evoking images of death, desolation, and wandering souls. Ethan didn't remember much about it. He had left when he was too young, retaining only hazy fragments of memory. He had spent most of his life in the city, with its towering skyscrapers, bustling streets, and brilliant lights that chased away the night. He had built a solid life for himself on a foundation of logic, of precise numbers, of architectural drawings detailed down to the millimeter. Everything in his world had to have a reason, a rule. He was an architect, a man who believed in science, in what could be seen, touched, and measured. Talk of blessed or cursed land, of ghosts and curses, was to him nothing but the product of a rich imagination, of superstition, and of humanity's inherent fear of the unknown. The bus jolted violently as the driver suddenly turned onto a smaller, rougher dirt road riddled with potholes. Red dust billowed behind the wheels, coating the roadside trees in a thick layer. The driver, a middle-aged man with a weathered face etched by time and the elements, glanced at Ethan in the rearview mirror. His eyes held a mixture of curiosity and pity. "You heading to Tombstone Village?" "Yes, sir," Ethan replied quietly, his voice softer than usual, almost lost in the engine's noise. The driver clicked his tongue, a dry sound filled with sympathy and a hint of pity. "That village, not many people go there, and not many leave. What's a young man like you doing back there?" "I'm here to take care of some family business." "Then make it quick and get out," the driver said, his voice lowering, heavy with a sense of warning. "It's not good to stay long. The land isn't welcoming." Ethan just stayed silent. Although his reason told him those words were just old superstitions, ancient tales, the driver's comments somehow planted a seed of indescribable unease in his heart, an invisible anxiety creeping into his very being. He felt that something was waiting for him in Tombstone Village, something he couldn't explain with science or logic. The bus stopped at the top of a slope. The road into the village was narrow and muddy, marked with deep wheel ruts. The oversized bus couldn't go any further. The driver didn't even turn off the engine, which rumbled on as if he wanted to drop off his passenger and leave this gloomy place as quickly as possible. "This is it, son. Just go straight down this slope and you'll be in the village. You'll have to walk a bit." Ethan grabbed his simple backpack and stepped off the bus. The damp air of the countryside, a unique humidity carrying the smell of decaying leaves, damp earth, and moss, immediately enveloped him, seeping through the fabric of his clothes. The bus engine roared, the sound echoing as it hastily turned around, leaving a trail of red dust behind. It quickly disappeared behind a grove of green bamboo, leaving Ethan alone in the terrifying silence of dusk in the remote village. Not a human voice, not the sound of a vehicle. Only the rustling of the wind through the dry bamboo leaves, like the whispers of souls telling stories. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself, and started up the slope. The dirt path was slippery and gently inclined, leading him deeper into the village. On both sides stood ancient trees with gnarled roots protruding from the ground like giant, sleeping pythons, creating a scene that was both majestic and eerie. The deeper he went, the colder the air became, strangely so, even though the sun was still out. The fading yellow sunlight seemed unable to penetrate the thick canopy of leaves and tangled branches, creating a damp and dark tunnel. Ethan felt as if he were stepping into another world, a world forgotten by time, a place where the clocks had seemingly stopped long ago. After walking a short distance, as the path began to level out, he saw the figure of a girl stooped over a bush of medicinal herbs by the roadside. She wore a traditional indigo blouse, the color of the earth and the evening sky, and her long black hair was tied neatly in a bun at the nape of her neck, revealing a slender, fair neck. Hearing Ethan's footsteps, the girl looked up. A delicate, gentle face with large, dark eyes, as clear as the surface of an autumn lake, shone with curiosity and a touch of shyness. "Ah, Are you Mr. Ethan? The girl asked hesitantly, her voice soft and clear as a stream. Ethan was surprised. Yes, I am. How did you know? The girl smiled, a relieved smile, as if a burden had been lifted. My grandmother told me to come out and meet you. She said a member of the Tran family would be coming from the city today. I'm Maya. Hello, Maya. Thank you for coming to get me. It's nothing. The guest house is at the end of the village. Let me show you the way. Maya picked up her woven basket, filled with fragrant herbs, and briskly led the way. She moved lightly, familiar with every tree, every stone, every corner of the path. Ethan followed, the presence of Maya, a flesh and blood person, bringing a sense of comfort despite her being a stranger, making the air feel less eerie and cold. This village. It seems so empty, doesn't it? Ethan said, breaking the heavy silence, trying to make conversation. Yes. There are few people, and by this time everyone is already home. The villagers here don't like to be out when it's getting dark, Maya replied, her voice holding a straightforward honesty, without any attempt to hide anything. Why is that? Maya paused for a moment, as if considering something, then turned to look at him. Her eyes held a serious look, tinged with fear. Because they say, this is the time when they start to walk. Ethan frowned. They? Yes. The departed. Ethan let out a short, forced laugh that sounded like a rasp in his throat. He had expected to hear stories like this when coming to a remote, isolated place like Tombstone Village. It's probably just stories adults tell to scare children. Maya didn't argue. She just quietly turned and continued walking, with no intention of persuading or refuting him. But her silence carried more weight than 1,000 counterarguments, making Ethan feel as if an invisible wall was separating him from this world. They passed a few houses with faded, moss-covered tile roofs and silent yards, devoid of people. A few curious eyes peeked through cracks in doors and old curtains, then quickly retracted when they met Ethan's gaze, as if he were a strange creature that didn't belong here. He felt like an intruder, an outsider, a foreign being in their closed-off, mysterious world. He felt scrutinized, judged by eyes hidden in the shadows. Finally, Maya stopped in front of a 3-bay tiled house that looked more well-kept than the others in the village, though it still bore a classic architectural style. This is the guest house. You can rest here tonight. I've had someone clean it up for you. Tomorrow morning, I'll take you up to see the villa. Maya pronounced the words the villa with a clear hesitation, an odd reluctance, as if it were a forbidden name not to be mentioned. Where is it? Ethan asked, looking around, trying to spot the mysterious structure. Maya pointed toward a hazy hill in the distance, where the evening mist was beginning to gather, enveloping the peak like a morning shroud. On the hilltop, faintly visible through the thin mist and the tall, gnarled ancient trees, was the silhouette of a large building, completely different from the simple, dilapidated roofs in the village below. A European-style dome, dark stone walls faded by time, and tall, empty windows like black, hollow eye sockets. Even from a distance, Ethan could feel a sense of desolation and solitude emanating from it, a chilling coldness. It stood there, imposing as a gloomy giant, silently watching over the village at its feet, like an ancient god, slumbering but ever present in its vigilance. "That's Moonwatch Manor," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible, as if she were afraid someone would hear the name. "But the villagers, they call it the Manor of Phantoms." Just as Maya finished speaking, a cold wind gusted from nowhere, carrying the scent of damp earth and decay. The sudden gust made Ethan shiver involuntarily, a chill running down his spine. He looked up at the hill, toward the villa. For a fleeting moment, he had the illusion that one of the dark windows on the second floor had flickered with a faint light that then vanished, like an eye opening and closing. It must have been a reflection of the setting sun. He reassured himself, trying to find a logical explanation for the strange phenomenon. "Thank you. See you tomorrow," Ethan said, trying to appear calm, though a sense of unease was rising within him. Maya nodded, quickly said goodbye, and walked away, her figure blending into the small path that was sinking into darkness, leaving Ethan alone with the descending night. Ethan pushed open the old wooden door and entered the guest house. It was quite clean inside, though the air still held the faint, musty smell typical of a house that had been unoccupied for a long time. He threw his simple backpack onto the bed, feeling utterly exhausted from the long journey and the whirlwind of emotions. He didn't want dinner, he just wanted to go to sleep early to end this strange day, to escape the thoughts besieging his mind. The night in Tombstone Village was absolutely silent, terrifyingly so. This was not the peaceful, relaxing silence one usually finds in the countryside, but an emptiness, a chilling stillness, as if all sounds of life had been sucked away, leaving only the silence of death. Ethan tossed and turned on the creaky bamboo bed. Each time he moved, the creak of the bamboo echoed in the empty space, sounding like someone's footsteps. He was used to the incessant noise of the city, the traffic, the horns, the chatter of pedestrians. The silence here made him tense, the smallest sound was magnified tenfold, fraying his nerves. Around midnight, just as he had drifted off, a strange sound woke him. The sound was very faint, steady, like someone lightly and persistently tapping on the window with their fingernails. Ethan held his breath, listening. The sound stopped. He breathed a sigh of relief, telling himself it was probably just a dry branch hitting the window pane in the wind. He closed his eyes, trying to fall back asleep. Another sound suddenly rang out, clearer this time, like something sharp scraping against wood. There was no mistaking it this time. It wasn't a branch. It was coming from the room's entrance door. Ethan sat bolt upright, his heart pounding so hard in his chest he could feel every beat. He stared at the door, but the thick darkness in the room prevented him from seeing anything, only vague shapes forming in his mind. He reached for the light switch. The weak, yellow light from the bulb flooded out, chasing away some of the darkness. The room was still empty, with no sign of an intruder. Nothing was out of place. He tiptoed over and pressed his ear against the cold wooden door. Dead silent. I must be imagining things. I'm just exhausted, and it's causing hallucinations. He told himself, trying to calm down, then returned to bed. But as soon as he lay down, a delicate, distant melody began to play. A haunting and sorrowful classical tune, played by a music box. The sound was ethereally clear, seeping through the cracks of the night, echoing in the quiet darkness. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, with no specific direction, sometimes near, sometimes far, as if the player was circling the house, toying with his fear. Ethan lay still, cold sweat beading on the back of his neck, soaking his pillow. He tried to convince himself it was just music from a neighbor's house, or an old radio. But in this isolated, deathly village, where everyone feared the dark and the supernatural, who would be playing a music box in the middle of the night, amidst this terrifying silence? The melody repeated over and over, haunting, tormenting, drilling into his mind, making it impossible for him to escape. It reminded him of Maya's chilling words, "This is the time when they start to walk." And so, Ethan lay awake to the sound of the ghostly music until the first rays of dawn crept through the door's cracks, pushing back the darkness. The melody vanished into thin air as if it had never existed, leaving only a chilling emptiness. His first day in Tombstone Village was over, but Ethan knew the horror had only just begun. And its source, he felt, was waiting for him on that hill, within the silent walls of the Manor of Phantoms. He felt an invisible string pulling him toward the villa, a dangerous but irresistible attraction. Dawn in Tombstone Village didn't bring a sense of freshness, but rather a coat of pale gray paint over the lingering night, making everything seem bleaker and more somber. Ethan sat on the cold stone steps of the porch, dark circles under his eyes after a sleepless night, his temples throbbing. The music box melody had stopped with the darkness, but not before etching itself into his mind, repeating like a persistent scratch on an old vinyl record, impossible to erase. He tried to use his architect's logic to analyze it, an acoustic effect caused by the wind, music from a distant house, his own unstable and stressed psychological state. But no explanation was enough to dispel the chill running down his spine or the ghostly images that flashed through his mind. He felt he was standing on a thin line between reality and the supernatural, and he was slowly being pulled to the other side. Just then, Maya appeared at the end of the lane, carrying a small tiered lunchbox that radiated warmth and the smell of food. Seeing Ethan's haggard and worn-out state, she looked worried, her dark eyes wide. "Mr. Ethan, you couldn't sleep?" "I'm just not used to the place," Ethan replied evasively, his voice hoarse, unwilling to admit the fear gnawing at him. "And also, I think someone was playing music last night. It was a bit loud." Maya's hand, which was handing the lunchbox to Ethan, froze in midair. The smile on her lips vanished, replaced by an unconcealable fear that was plain in her eyes. "Music? You heard music?" she whispered, her voice barely a fearful murmur. "Yeah, a piano or a music box melody or something. Maybe someone was having a party." Ethan tried to maintain a calm facade, but his voice still trembled slightly. "No one in Tombstone Village uses a music box, sir," Maya said, her voice firm but trembling. "And no one would dare play music at night. That was her music. Her. The vengeful spirit in the red silk gown. They say she used to be a pianist. When her hatred runs high, her music plays to summon the souls of those who wronged her." Ethan fell silent. Maya's outlandish explanation, instead of making him laugh as he usually would at such superstitions, matched what he had experienced with terrifying accuracy, making it impossible for him to deny. He took the warm lunch box, but its heat seemed insufficient to warm the chill inside him, a cold that came not from the temperature, but from fear. He felt a cold draft seeping into every cell of his body. After a forced breakfast, of which Ethan only ate a few bites, Maya led him up the hill. The closer they got to Moonwatch Manor, the more desolate and overgrown the path became. Weeds grew higher than their knees, crowding together and obscuring the path, making their steps heavy and difficult. The air was thick with the smell of decaying leaves, damp earth, and a strange, indescribable odor, like the smell of rot and oblivion. The villa appeared before them, immense and silent like a sleeping beast, with strange architectural lines that possessed a haunting, dilapidated beauty. The plaster on the walls had peeled off in large patches, revealing mossy, time-faded red brick underneath. The glassless windows were like empty, black eye sockets, staring down at the village below, like soulless eyes watching every move. A giant vine, its trunk as thick as a large python, clung tightly to one side of the wall, its branches weaving through the windows as if trying to swallow the entire building, making it a part of the wild nature. "It's bigger than I thought," Ethan whispered, his voice slightly overwhelmed. With his architect's eye, he could still recognize the faded beauty in its every line, a delicate combination of classical Gothic and romantic Indo-Chinese styles, something that must have once been the pride of a noble family. He felt an infinite regret for this architectural work, a masterpiece being slowly eroded by time and neglect. Maya didn't answer. She just stood at a distance, clutching the hem of her blouse, not daring to take another step, her face pale with fear. "You're not coming in?" Ethan asked, noticing her hesitation. I don't dare. Grandma told me not to go in there," Maya said, her eyes looking at the villa with terror, as if seeing a monster. "I'll wait for you here." Ethan shrugged, though he felt a little apprehensive himself, a creeping sense of unease. He took out the old set of keys his grandfather had left him, rusty and covered in the dust of time. The brass lock was green with rust, but after some fiddling, it finally gave way with a dry click that echoed eerily in the silent space, like a mournful cry. The heavy wooden door slowly swung open with a sorrowful creak, a sound like the moan of an imprisoned soul. A blast of cold, stagnant air from inside hit Ethan's face, carrying the smell of dust, of time, of decay, and of something unnameable, a scent of oblivion, sorrow, and death. The villa's grand hall appeared before him, shrouded in darkness and silence. The furniture inside was covered with white cloths that had yellowed to the color of thin rice porridge, thick with dust and cobwebs, looking like motionless ghosts. Under his feet, the patterned tile floor was still intact but dulled by a thick layer of dust. The only light came from the empty window frames, creating slanted sunbeams in the dust-laden air, making the space even more ethereal and ghostly. Ethan stepped inside, each footstep echoing in the terrifying silence. The moment he crossed the threshold, the door suddenly slammed shut behind him with a deafening bang that made him jump. His heart raced in his chest, so hard he could feel its rhythm. Must be the wind, he told himself, but when he turned back, he saw clearly that no breeze was blowing through the doorway, there was no movement of air at all. The space fell silent again, a silence even heavier than before, as if something was lurking, waiting for him. He began his work, walking around the first floor, trying to maintain his composure, though a sense of unease was building inside him. A large living room with an old grand piano stood in the corner, its ivory keys yellowed and covered in dust. A dining room with a long table that could seat 20, the upholstered chairs tattered and torn, looking like demons waiting in attendance. Everything exuded an air of faded glory, a tragic decay. But wherever he went, Ethan felt an invisible gaze following him, a cold presence that made the hair on his neck stand on end, a feeling like someone was standing right behind him. He stopped in the middle of the hall, where a winding wooden staircase led to the second floor, its old steps creaking with his every move. On the wall opposite the staircase was an empty space, the paint noticeably lighter than the surrounding area, clearly where a very large portrait had once hung. He wondered who the portrait was of, and why it had been removed. Just then, a deep, warm voice from the doorway made Ethan startle and turn around. A man of about 60, with a stout build, a kind face, and white hair and beard, was standing at the door, smiling at him. It was the smile of an elder, gentle and benevolent, but for some reason, Ethan saw something forced in it, a falseness in his eyes, a hidden anxiety. "You must be Ethan, Mr. Tran's grandson, correct?" "Yes, that's me." "And you are?" "I am Elder Nguyen, the chief of this village." "Just call me Elder Nguyen." "I heard you came back to inspect the villa, so I came to see if I could help in any way." "Thank you, Elder. I'm just here to survey it for an appraisal," Ethan replied, trying to be polite. Elder Nguyen stepped inside, his eyes scanning the villa. They rested for a long time on the empty space on the wall where Ethan had just been looking, and an enigmatic smile flickered across his lips. "Ha, it's been decades," Elder Nguyen sighed, a sigh full of regret. "This place used to be the most splendid mansion in the entire province. Your great-grandfather was a brilliant man, but it's a pity that beauty brings misfortune." "What do you mean by that?" Ethan asked, sensing that Elder Nguyen knew something, a secret he was searching for. "Ah, well. Just old stories," Elder Nguyen said evasively, not wanting to elaborate. "I heard you couldn't sleep last night." Ethan was surprised. News traveled fast in this village, as if everyone was watching his every move. "I'm just not used to the house. The negative energy here is quite heavy," Elder Nguyen said, his tone casual but full of hidden meaning, a subtle warning. "You should finish your work quickly and go back to the city. This place isn't for young people. Before your grandfather passed, he also told me to look after you, not to let you stay here too long." Elder Nguyen's words sounded like the concern of an elder, but to Ethan, they felt more like a warning, even a veiled threat, an urge for him to leave. He decided not to ask about the music from last night. He knew Elder Nguyen wouldn't tell him the truth. After a few more pleasantries, Elder Nguyen left, leaving Ethan alone in the villa. The silence returned, but this time Ethan felt it was even heavier, like a stone pressing on his chest. The words of Elder Nguyen and Maya, combined with his own strange experiences, were gradually eroding the wall of reason he had painstakingly built, making him start to believe in the absurd. He felt a strong urge, an uncontrollable curiosity, compelling him to explore further. He decided to go up to the second floor, to the family's former bedrooms. The wooden staircase creaked under his feet, the sounds echoing in the silent space. The second floor was much darker and colder than the first, the air damp and suffocating. There were several bedrooms, all empty and dusty, the furniture shrouded in white cloths like motionless ghosts. He entered the largest room, likely the master bedroom. It was spacious but exuded a chilling and desolate emptiness. The room had a balcony overlooking a wild garden behind the house, where overgrown ancient trees blocked out the light. In the middle of the room was a large, dust-covered bed with 4 intricately carved posts. Ethan stopped abruptly, his eyes narrowing. On the floor, amidst the thick dust that had accumulated over many years, were several clean, winding streaks, as if someone in a long dress had recently walked by, leaving a clear trail. He bent down, his heart pounding. And then he saw it. A single thread of red as blood, caught on the leg of the bed, standing out against the gray dust. It was too new, too vibrant compared to all the old and dilapidated surroundings, like a fresh bloodstain on a faded painting. He quickly backed out of the room, feeling as if he had just trespassed somewhere forbidden, the private space of someone deceased. An icy chill ran down his spine, the feeling that someone was standing right behind him, their cold breath on his neck. He didn't want to stay here another second. He rushed down the stairs and out the main door, not daring to look back, afraid of what he might see. He just ran as fast as he could until he was out of the villa's grounds, back to where Maya was waiting anxiously, huddled under an ancient tree. Seeing Ethan's deathly pale face, his eyes etched with sheer terror, Maya knew without asking that he had encountered something horrifying, inside that villa. For the next few days, Ethan avoided Moonwatch Manor like the plague. Fear haunted him every moment, making it impossible to concentrate on anything. He spent his time walking around the village, trying to find some peace, or at least an explanation for the strange phenomena he had experienced. He struck up conversations with a few villagers, trying to gather information as naturally as possible, probing into the history of the villa and the Tran family. But the people of Tombstone Village were tight-lipped. Whenever he mentioned the villa or his family, they would change the subject or find an excuse to leave, their eyes filled with fear and suspicion. This collective avoidance only deepened his suspicion. He knew there was a secret that the entire village was hiding together, a dark secret buried for generations. He felt like he was lost in a maze where every path led to an impenetrable wall. The haunting didn't leave him, even when he tried to escape it. The nightmares became more frequent and vivid, so lifelike he couldn't distinguish between dream and reality. In his dreams, he no longer saw just a hazy woman in a red silk gown, he saw the surroundings more clearly. He saw her standing by the old grand piano in the main hall, her long, pale fingers gliding over the silent keys, yet he could hear the mournful music echoing in his mind. He saw her standing on the second-floor balcony, her long black hair loose and blowing in the wind, staring into the distance with infinite despair, a sorrow beyond words. And sometimes, she would turn to look at him. Her face was still hidden by her long hair, but he could feel a towering resentment boring into his soul, sending an icy chill down his spine. That resentment wasn't just a ghostly presence, it seeped into his every dream, his every thought. It was a terrible psychological burden that left him exhausted and sleepless. Ethan's initial skepticism had completely vanished, replaced by an intense curiosity mixed with fear and a vague sense of responsibility. He knew he couldn't leave until he found the truth behind it all. He couldn't just abandon the villa and its mysteries. A strong urge, some kind of calling, made him decide to return to the villa, not as an architect to appraise or repair it, but as an investigator, a truth seeker. This time, he was better prepared. He brought a high-powered flashlight, gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints, and a camera to document his findings. He knew he was dealing with the unexplainable, and he needed all the help he could get. Maya still only dared to wait for him at the edge of the woods, her face filled with worry, but this time she handed him a small pouch of dried gladitsia pods, tied tightly with a red string. "My grandmother says this helps ward off evil spirits. Just keep it with you for peace of mind." Ethan didn't refuse. He was no longer in a position to mock such things. He had learned that some things lay beyond the scope of science and logic. He felt a strange trust in the words of Maya and her grandmother. He returned to the villa. The air inside was still cold and threatening, a heavy feeling enveloping him the moment he stepped over the threshold. But this time, Ethan had a clear objective. He went straight to the second floor, back into the master bedroom. The red thread was still there, a striking red dot on the gray dust, like a sign, an invitation from the past. He carefully placed it in a small Ziploc bag, feeling as if he were holding a sacred artifact. He began to meticulously survey the room, running his hands over every wall, knocking on every floorboard, checking every little detail. He left no corner unexamined, any one of them could hold a secret. As he was checking the wall behind the large bed, he noticed something strange. Although the wall looked seamless, when he knocked on a certain area, the sound was deeper and hollower than elsewhere, as if there was an empty space behind it. He shone his flashlight on it. The powerful beam illuminated the wall, and he saw a very faint, almost imperceptible outline of a rectangular door. A secret door. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest, so loudly he could hear its beat. He pushed against the wall with all his might. At first, it didn't budge, solid as rock, but after a few tries, a large section of the wall slowly gave way and swung inwards, revealing a pitch-black space and a gust of stale, suffocating air, thick with the smell of dampness and decay. A secret chamber. Ethan shone his flashlight inside. It was a small, windowless room, only a few square meters, with a low ceiling and air so thick it was hard to breathe. In the middle of the room was an old wooden chest, intricately carved with patterns that had faded over time but still exuded an air of elegance. Other than the chest, there was nothing else. This room was clearly a hiding place for something incredibly important, a secret kept hidden for years. He cautiously stepped inside, the air so thick it felt like he was breathing dust and time. He approached the chest. It wasn't locked, there were no locks or latches. He took a deep breath, his hands trembling as he lifted the lid, a feeling of extreme suspense rising within him. Inside was not gold or jewels as he might have imagined, not vast riches. On top lay a blood-red silk gown, neatly folded. Its red color was still incredibly vibrant, almost unaffected by time, so brilliant it was frightening, like fresh blood. The moment he saw it, Ethan knew this was the gown the woman in his dreams wore, the gown of the Vengeful Spirit in the red silk gown. He didn't dare touch it, a creepy feeling running down his spine. Beneath the silk gown was a worn leather-bound diary, its pages yellowed with age, and a small silver music box with a ballerina figurine on the lid, poised in a pirouette. A sense of familiarity washed over Ethan, a strange connection to these items. With an uncontrollable urge, Ethan picked up the music box. It was ice cold in his hand, a cold that came not from temperature but from death itself. He slowly opened the lid. The familiar, haunting melody played again. But this time it wasn't distant and echoing, it was clear and sharp right next to his ear, as if someone were playing it right beside him. This was it. The melody that had tortured him every night, the melody of the vengeful spirit in the red silk gown. The secret door slammed shut with a deafening crash, plunging Ethan into absolute darkness, completely cut off from the outside world. The flashlight flew from his hand, rolled into a corner, and went out, leaving him in solitude and fear. The music box melody continued to play, steady and cruel in the confined space, like a taunt. Ethan screamed, his voice breaking with terror. He threw himself at the door, punching and kicking it hopelessly, but it was as solid as rock, unmoving. He was trapped. Is anyone there? Help me. Maya. He yelled, his voice echoing in the small chamber. The only answer was the music and the echo of his own voice, an ultimate, crushing loneliness. Absolute panic seized him. He slumped to the floor, his back against the cold wall, his whole body shaking. The darkness around him seemed alive, thickening, squeezing him, making him feel like he was suffocating. He sensed another presence in the room, right beside him, a feeling of utter cold and horror. An icy breath brushed against the back of his neck, making every hair stand on end. Give it back to me. A whispered voice echoed, not as sound, but as a vibration directly inside his head, so clear he could feel every word. The voice of a woman, full of pain and resentment, carrying all the fury and sorrow that had been buried for so long. Ethan squeezed his eyes shut, muttering about Maya's pouch of Gladitsia pods like a mantra, hoping it could protect him from this supernatural force. He didn't know how long he sat in there. Time seemed to stand still, there was no concept of day or night in the dark secret room. The music box melody repeated endlessly, wearing down his nerves, making him feel like he was going insane. Just when he thought he was about to lose his mind, the melody abruptly stopped, the sudden silence terrifying. And the secret door slowly, cautiously creaked open. Faint light from outside poured in, chasing away the thick darkness. The room was empty. No one was there. Ethan scrambled out, trembling, drenched in sweat, his clothes covered in dust. He hastily grabbed the diary, not daring to look back at the chest or the red silk gown, afraid of being pulled into another nightmare, and ran headlong out of the villa, never looking back. He didn't stop until he saw the worried figure of Maya, who had stood there, patiently waiting for him. She screamed when she saw his panicked state, her face turning pale. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep a wink. He turned on all the lights in the guest house, clutching the diary as if it were his only lifeline. The fear was still there, but it was now replaced by a burning determination, an irresistible urge. He had to read it. He had to know what happened in that house, had to find the truth behind the curse and the strange phenomena. He turned to the first page. Soft, elegant handwriting appeared under the dim yellow light, the ink faded with time. Date. Month. Year. Today, he proposed to me. He said Moonwatch will be our home. I was so happy. Ethan read. He read voraciously, as if his life depended on it, as if every word, every sentence held a piece of the writer's soul. He read non-stop, through the entire night. And then, a tragic story of love, betrayal, and death slowly unfolded before him, clear and painful, a truth more horrifying than any ghost he could imagine, a truth that could shatter all his beliefs. The Diary of Violet was not just a collection of private thoughts or daily records. It was living proof, a powerful indictment of a life crushed under the heel of power and selfishness. Every page, every line was soaked with the tears, pain, and despair of the unfortunate young woman. Ethan read about her passionate love for his own great-grandfather, Ethan Tran, a wealthy young man who had studied abroad in France. Julian was a dashing, elegant man with a captivating gaze and a charming smile, who had made Violet's heart flutter from their very first meeting. He had promised her a lavish wedding, a happy future, a perfect home at Moonwatch Manor, which he built specifically for her as a testament to his eternal love. Violet, an orphan with nothing but her outstanding talent for playing the piano and a dreamy, artistic soul, had believed his promises completely, believed in a love she thought was destiny. She had placed her entire trust, her whole heart, and her very life in that man's hands. But then, the diary entries began to darken, the initially soft handwriting becoming shaky and scrawled. Julian started avoiding her, their dates grew infrequent and then stopped altogether. His family was forcing him to marry the daughter of another wealthy landlord family in the region, the ancestors of Elder and Gwyn, to consolidate the power, wealth, and status of the Tran clan. It was an arranged marriage, an economic transaction disguised as love, and Violet was merely an obstacle, a mistake that needed to be eliminated. Violet discovered she was pregnant. A glimmer of hope was extinguished when she told her lover the news. Instead of being happy, instead of welcoming the news as a miracle, Julian became terrified, his face white, his eyes filled with disgust and anxiety. He was afraid of his family's reaction, afraid of losing his power and prestige. The last page of the diary was written in a messy scrawl, blurred by tears, the ink stains on the page like still wet tear tracks. Every word was a heart-wrenching scream, full of bitterness and hatred. He betrayed me. He and that witch's family. They said the child in my belly is a disgrace. They forced me to get rid of it. They locked me in the secret room. They said if I didn't obey, they would tell the whole village I was a wanton woman. I will never forgive them. Even as a ghost, I will return to demand justice. Blood must be paid with blood. The line ended in a long ink streak, as if the writer had collapsed, her hand too weak to continue, or as if her rage had surpassed all human limits. Ethan slammed the diary shut, his hands shaking violently, his forehead beaded with cold sweat. He felt an electric shock run down his spine, a feeling of disgust welling up inside him. The truth was not a suicide over a broken heart as the villagers whispered. It was a murder. His great-grandfather, Ethan Tran, the man his family had always been proud of for his talent and erudition, was not just a cruel betrayer, but an accomplice to a heinous crime, a crime he couldn't believe. And Elder Nguyen's family, who always appeared so kind and benevolent, were actually demons in human form, the ones who had aided in that crime for the sake of profit and status. They had killed Violet and her unborn child to cover their tracks, to hide their secret, and to usurp the Tran family's assets. The curse of Tombstone Village didn't come from a random, motiveless spirit, but from an unpaid blood debt, an extreme injustice crying out for retribution. A sense of guilt and revulsion rose in Ethan. He was the flesh and blood of the one who had caused this tragedy. He carried the blood of Julian Tran, the man who had taken the lives of Violet and her innocent child. He understood why Violet's spirit was targeting him, relentlessly haunting him with dreams and ghostly music. To her, he was the embodiment of her betrayer, the personification of the family that had caused her unbearable pain. The moment he understood everything, the moment the horrifying truth was revealed, the paranormal phenomena in the guest house intensified beyond measure, as if Violet's spirit had sensed Ethan's awakening. The ceiling light flickered violently and then exploded with a sharp pop, scattering glass everywhere and plunging the room into thick darkness. Objects on the table, cups, saucers, plates, began to vibrate intensely before crashing to the floor. The cabinet doors flew open and slammed shut repeatedly, creating a terrifying, drum-like rhythm that made Ethan jump. "Get out! All of you get out!" Violet's voice was no longer a whisper in his head but a scream from every corner of the room, echoing through the space like a storm of fury. It was a cry full of rage, pain, and despair, a wail from the depths of suffering. Ethan grabbed the diary, clutched it to his chest, and fled the house in sheer terror, not daring to look back. He ran straight to Maya's house, running without stopping, as if pursued by an invisible force. It was nearly dawn, the first rays of light glimmering on the horizon. He pounded on the door, over and over, relentlessly. Maya and her grandmother, a woman with snow-white hair and a kind face but with incredibly sharp, intelligent eyes, opened the door. Seeing Ethan's panicked state, his disheveled clothes, and the diary in his hand, the old woman seemed to understand everything, her expression one of deep comprehension and sorrow. She invited him in and made him a cup of hot ginger tea, its warmth the only thing that seemed to dispel the cold that had invaded him. "A tragedy, a true tragedy," the old woman sighed after hearing Ethan recount the entire story, from the nightmares to finding the diary and the horrifying truth. "I heard whispers of this when I was a child. They said Miss Violet died of an illness, but there were other rumors. So it was all true." Her voice was low and sad, full of regret and pity for Violet's fate. "What do I do now?" Ethan asked, his voice desperate. He felt like he was at a crossroads, with no idea where to go. "Her spirit will never leave me in peace. Her anger has reached its peak," the old woman said, her face serious. "When you found the truth, it was like opening a wound that had festered for too long. Now, her resentment won't just be aimed at you, but will spread to the whole village, especially Elder Nguyen's family." The old woman's words came true that very day. Horrifying news spread through Tombstone Village faster than any rumor. Elder Nguyen's youngest son, a strong young man in his prime, had suddenly gone insane. He tore off his clothes, ran naked through the village screaming nonsense, and then threw himself down the village well. Luckily, the villagers managed to rescue him, pulling him up from the deep well. When brought up, he just stared blankly, constantly muttering, "She's back. She's back for revenge." Fear enveloped Tombstone Village. No one dared to go out after dark, every house was bolted shut, no lights were lit, and the village sank into a deathly silence. The mournful piano music and wails were no longer confined to the villa but lurked in every alley, seeping into the villagers' sleep and giving them no rest. Knowing he could hide it no longer, knowing the truth was out and Violet's furious spirit threatened the entire village, Elderngwyn came to Maya's house that night to see Ethan. His usual benevolent facade had completely vanished, replaced by a gray, haggard face drawn with fear, his eyes dark and swollen from sleeplessness and worry. He fell to his knees before Ethan, a pathetic sight, and clasped his hands in supplication. "Mr. Ethan, I'm begging you. Please, save my family. Save you." Ethan sneered, a bitter laugh full of contempt and rage. "Why should I save you? You know better than anyone what your ancestors and my great-grandfather did to Miss Violet. I know. I know it's all the sin of our ancestors." Elderngwyn cried, his voice hoarse with fear and remorse. "But the descendants are innocent. Please, take that diary and burn it. Burn the villa down too. Let it all be buried in the past. You can have any amount of money you want, my family will pay." He made the offer, a greedy and selfish bargain, wanting only to silence the ghost and conceal the crime. "You think money can solve this?" Ethan yelled, his anger exploding, unable to contain his emotions. "Can money buy back her life and her unborn child's? You don't want to bring her justice, you just want to silence her one more time. Then what do you want?" Elderngwyn asked in despair, realizing money couldn't solve this problem. "I want to set her free," Ethan said decisively, his voice becoming calm and filled with determination. Hearing this, Maya's grandmother spoke, her voice low but powerful. "Freeing a tormented spirit bound by a curse of hatred is no easy task. Burning the house and the diary will only fuel her anger, making her resentment even heavier. We must appease her, show her that the truth has been revealed and the guilty must pay the price. We need to perform a proper requiem, a solemn ceremony to guide her soul to its eternal rest." "How do we do that?" Maya asked nervously, understanding this was an incredibly difficult and dangerous task. "To perform the ceremony, we need to gather all of her belongings," the old woman said. "The diary and the music box are part of it. But the most important item, the one most imbued with her resentment, is the red silk gown she wore on the day she was murdered. The one you saw in the chest. But it's in the secret chamber," Ethan said, still haunted by what happened in that room. "I don't dare go back there." At this, Elderngwyn lifted his head, his voice trembling as he revealed another horrifying secret. "No, the real gown isn't there. My ancestors were so terrified that they took the real gown, placed a spell on it, and hid it away. They put a fake gown in the chest as a seal. They believed that as long as the gown was hidden, Violet's spirit would never be strong enough for revenge. The real gown. It's hidden in my family's ancestral hall. The 15th of the 7th lunar month is approaching," Maya's grandmother said, gazing out the window where the darkness was thickening. That is the day the gates of hell open wide, and Violet's resentment will be at its peak, stronger than ever. If we don't act before that night, I fear this entire village will be engulfed in her wrath, and no one will escape. A bold and perilous plan was formed. They had to break into the Ngwyn ancestral hall on the night of the 14th of the 7th month, just before the hour of the rat on the 15th, to retrieve the red silk gown. It was their final gamble, one where the price of failure would be the lives of everyone, not just their own. They knew it was a near impossible task, but they had no other choice. The night of the 14th of the 7th month. The sky over Tombstone Village was ink black, without a single star or moon, as if nature itself was holding its breath before a fateful night. The wind howled through the dry bamboo groves, sounding like the wails of tormented souls, the mournful cries of imprisoned spirits. The air in the village was thick, suffocating, and heavy with foreboding. Every house was securely bolted, no lights were lit, and the entire village was plunged into a deathly silence, broken only by the wind and the pounding of fearful hearts. Ethan, Maya, and Elder Ngwyn met at the village entrance, their shadows flickering in the faint light of a flashlight. Elder Ngwyn had given them a detailed diagram of the ancestral hall, mapping out every nook and cranny. He wouldn't go with them, afraid his family would discover his betrayal and knowing he no longer had the strength to face what awaited them. He only trembled as he gave his final, hoarse instruction: the gown is hidden behind the large lacquered board on the main altar. Be careful. Her spirit. She will be very strong tonight. His words were like a prophecy, a final warning. Ethan and Maya looked at each other, their eyes reflecting both extreme fear and unshakable determination, a will stronger than fear itself. They dressed in dark clothing, melting into the shadows, moving silently through the terrifying quiet toward the Ngwyn ancestral hall at the far end of the village. The ancestral hall was an ancient, imposing building with a curved, moss-covered roof that looked both majestic and gloomy, its classical lines worn by time. It was surrounded by a high, sturdy stone wall, like an impenetrable fortress. Fortunately, Elder Ngwyn had shown them a damaged spot in the wall, a crack just large enough for them to squeeze through, an opening into another world. Inside the courtyard, the silence was even more terrifying than outside. Not a single insect chirped, not a bird called, only the sound of their own cautious footsteps. Holding their breath, they crept across the mossy brick courtyard toward the main entrance. The door was locked from the inside. They had to circle around to the back and pry open a small, termite-eaten window to get in. Inside the ancestral hall, the musty smell of old incense hit their noses, a scent typical of ancient places of worship, mixed with the smell of dust and decay. Faint moonlight trickled through the window cracks, illuminating rows of black ironwood pillars and faded, gilt-lettered couplets, making the scene even more ghostly. In the center of the hall stood the main altar, imposing and cold, with ash-filled incense urns and old ancestral tablets. "It's behind that horizontal board," Ethan whispered, pointing to the large wooden sign above the altar inscribed with the characters "Virtue shines forever," a heavy, ancient plaque. They used a small table to climb up. Ethan climbed while Maya held the table steady below. The moment his hand touched the board, an icy blast of wind hit him, so strong it nearly knocked him off the table, feeling like someone was pushing him away. At the same time, all the extinguished candles on the altar suddenly burst into flames of an eerie green, flickering in the dark space like ghostly eyes staring at them. "Ethan, be careful," Maya cried from below, her voice filled with fear. Their shadows stretched and danced grotesquely on the walls, moving with the ghoulish flames like chained demons. Ethan felt an invisible pressure on his shoulders, like a hand trying to hold him down. He heard a whisper in his ear, Violet's voice no longer just angry, but filled with scorn and mockery. "Do you think you can save anyone? Descendant of a betrayer?" Ethan gritted his teeth and, with all his strength, pushed the board aside. It moved heavily, with a sickening creak. Behind it was a small, dark, and damp recess in the wall. And inside, coiled like a sleeping snake, was a red silk gown. Its red was not as vibrant as the fake one in the chest, but a deep, dark red, the color of dried blood, a color of death and hatred. The instant Ethan's hand touched the gown, a piercing scream erupted, not from any mouth, but seemingly from the very space around them, shaking the entire ancestral hall and causing tiles to fall from the roof. The doors slammed shut violently, the sound echoing everywhere. The worship objects on the altar flew into the air and crashed to the ground, shattering. From the darkness in the corner of the room, a figure slowly materialized. It was Violet. But she was no longer the hazy figure from his dreams. She appeared clearly, hovering a few inches off the ground, a terrifying and gruesome presence. She still wore the red silk gown, but now it was tattered, stained black with hatred, blood, and tears. Her long black hair fell over her face, but through the tangled mess, Ethan and Maya could see her eyes. Eyes with no whites, only a solid black, boiling with a hatred that burned like a hellfire. "Give me back my life." Violet's ghost lunged at them with horrifying speed. Maya screamed, pulling Ethan to the ground, narrowly avoiding the lightning-fast attack. An ironwood pillar where Ethan had just been standing was struck by an unseen force and splintered, sending wood flying. "Run!" Ethan yelled, still clutching the silk gown, knowing they couldn't fight this force. They rushed to the door, but it was blocked by some power, refusing to open. Violet's spirit charged again, this time grabbing Maya and lifting her into the air, her hands tightening around her throat. Maya struggled desperately, her face turning pale from lack of air, her eyes wide with terror. "No!" Ethan screamed. He didn't know what to do, a feeling of utter helplessness overwhelming him. Just then, the main door was kicked open with a tremendous crash. Elder Nguyen rushed in, a bloody knife in his hand, fresh blood still dripping onto the floor. "Let them go. This debt belongs to my forefathers, let me be the one to pay it." He yelled, charging toward the spirit, his face a mask of determination and anguish. Violet turned, her black eyes staring at him, a flicker of surprise in her gaze. She threw Maya aside and lunged at Elder Nguyen. "Your debt. All of you must pay." Elder Nguyen didn't flinch. He raised the knife, not to stab Violet, but to plunge it deep into his own heart. Blood gushed out, soaking his shirt. "Blood must be paid with blood. I beg for forgiveness." He collapsed, his breath ragged, his eyes fixed on Violet's spirit. Violet's spirit faltered, seemingly confused by his suicide. The rage in her eyes seemed to lessen, replaced by an emptiness, a profound sorrow. Seizing the moment, Ethan pulled Maya up, clutched the red silk gown, and smashed through a window, scrambling outside without looking back. They ran for their lives, sprinting straight for Moonwatch Manor, where they had to complete the final ritual before dawn, before Violet's resentment could flare up again. When they arrived, the villa seemed even gloomier than before, a cold aura still clinging to it. They ran straight into the grand hall. Ethan placed the red silk gown, the diary, and the music box on the floor in the center of the hall, where the first rays of dawn would strike. He used a lighter to set them on fire. The flames erupted, not in a normal orange, but in a cold, ethereal green, like the fire of a soul. From within the flames, Violet's image appeared again, no longer terrifying. She stood there, her face now clear, beautiful but tear-stained, her eyes no longer boiling with hatred but filled with endless sadness and a newfound peace. She looked at Ethan, a look no longer of resentment, but of understanding and gratitude. "Please, forgive us," Ethan knelt, his voice choked with emotion, tears starting to fall from his own eyes. "Please forgive the sins of my ancestor. Please, pass on." Violet said nothing. She reached a hand toward the fire, touching the burning diary. The image of his great-grandfather, Ethan Tran, emerged from it, his face full of pain and regret, his eyes also filled with tears. The two hazy figures looked at each other for a moment, an unspoken forgiveness exchanged between their souls. Then, it all vanished. The fire went out. Only a thin wisp of white smoke remained, circling the hall once before drifting out through a broken window and disappearing into the brightening sky, carrying with it the soul of Violet and peace for Moonwatch Manor. At the same moment, the music box on the floor opened on its own, playing its sad melody one last time, the tune Ethan had heard every night, before falling silent forever, like a final farewell. The air in the villa suddenly felt light, as if an invisible weight had been lifted. The oppressive cold was completely gone. All that remained was the quiet of a long-abandoned place that had, at last, found peace. The curse of the Manor of Phantoms had been broken. Ethan and Maya collapsed onto the floor, exhausted but relieved, a sense of tranquility washing over them. They had done it. A few days later, Ethan left Tombstone Village. He didn't sell the villa. He decided to use his own savings to restore it, not to live in, but to turn it into a small library, a memorial for Violet and a reminder of a tragic past, a lesson about greed and betrayal. Tombstone Village gradually returned to its inherent peace, but no one could forget the horrifying events that had transpired. The death of Elder Nguyen was seen as a payment, an atonement for the sins of his ancestors. The Nguyen family's influence waned from that day on, never regaining its former status. Ethan never returned to Tombstone Village, but the image of the woman in the red silk gown and the haunting music box melody would forever be a scar on his soul, an indelible part of his memory. He had faced his family's demon, confronted the dark truth of his ancestor, and in the process, he came to understand that sometimes, the greatest horror comes not from ghosts or supernatural forces, but from the crimes that people inflict upon each other, crimes that can create curses that last for generations, haunting forever. And the only release can come from truth, and the courage to face it without flinching. 5 years later, a heavy afternoon rain poured down on Saigon, the fat drops lashing against the glass window of a small architectural office tucked away in a quiet alley in the heart of the bustling city. Ethan Tran stood looking out, not with weariness or boredom, but with a deep pensiveness, his eyes fixed on some distant point, as if lost in thought. The man he was now was a far cry from the arrogant, skeptical young man who had set foot in Tombstone Village so reluctantly 5 years ago. His hair was cut shorter, a few new lines creased the corners of his eyes, and his gaze was no longer sharp and doubtful but deeper, calmer, holding a sense of understanding and peace. The incident in Tombstone Village had changed him forever, not just his worldview, but his life's direction. He had left his job at the large firm he had once dreamed of and opened his own small office, specializing in renovating and restoring old buildings, houses that held stories within their walls. He no longer sought fame or fortune, but the stories hidden behind every wall, every brick, the forgotten souls in every corner of time. He sought peace, not just for himself, but for the places he visited. A soft ping from his computer pulled him from his thoughts. A new email. From Maya. It had become a ritual. Every few months, Maya would write him a letter. They didn't call or chat online, just simple emails, a fragile but durable thread connecting two people from different worlds who shared an unforgettable memory, a secret that bound them together. He opened the email. This time, besides the usual greetings, Maya had attached a photo. Ethan clicked on the file. The image slowly materialized, crisp and clear, and a faint, rare smile touched his lips, a smile full of warmth and peace. It was Moonwatch Manor. But it was no longer the Manor of Phantoms. The building was now coated in pristine white paint, with a new roof of bright red tiles that gleamed in the sun. The once shattered windows were now fitted with sparkling glass, reflecting the brilliant yellow sunlight of a beautiful morning like smiling eyes. The wild garden had been cleared, replaced by a lush green lawn and beds of colorful portulaca flowers blooming vibrantly. The ghostly vine had been removed, no longer shrouding the villa. The manor stood there, no longer looking solitary and gloomy, but graceful and full of life, like a noble lady awakened from a long sleep, freed from her curse. In front of the door, a wooden sign was hung with dignity, Moonwatch Library, in memory of Violet On. In the photo, several village children were sitting on the stone steps, reading colorful books. Their faces were bright and joyful, their innocent laughter seeming to chase away the sorrowful sounds of the past. Ethan could see Maya standing in the doorway, smiling at the children, her eyes full of tenderness and love. She looked more mature and beautiful now, her hair still in a simple high bun, but she exuded an air of grace and wisdom. She wore a sky blue AO dye, as elegant as a village schoolteacher, a person sowing seeds of knowledge and hope. He scrolled down to read Maya's words. Dear Ethan, Tombstone Village is very peaceful these days. Since the library opened, the village children are no longer afraid of this hill. They call it the House of Many Fairy Tales. Every afternoon, they come up here to read and play. Their laughter has chased away all the old, mournful sounds. My grandmother passed away 2 years ago. She went peacefully in her sleep. Before she passed, she told me that the village's curse was truly broken, not just because Miss Violet's soul had found peace, but because the living had learned how to face the past and turn pain into something beautiful. I still look after this library, as a promise to you, and also as a promise to Miss Violet. Sometimes, on bright moonlit nights, I sit alone in the grand hall, where you burned her last belongings. I don't feel the cold anymore. I just feel a strange sense of peace, as if someone is smiling and thanking us. I hope you are taking care of yourself in the city. I believe you are still doing your work, healing old houses, just as you healed this place. Maya. Ethan finished reading and sat in silence for a long time, letting every word sink in. He reached out a hand, lightly touching the image of Maya and the library on the screen, as if he could feel the warmth and peace from that place. The scar on his soul would never disappear. It remained as an imprint of the past, but it no longer ached. It had become a part of him, a reminder of the fragile line between light and darkness, between sin and redemption, between life and death. Violet on. He still thought of her often. Not as a terrifying ghost, but as a woman with a tragic fate, one who had found peace after so many years of suffering. She had found her peace. And he, in a way, had found his too. The rain outside had stopped. On the horizon, a faint ray of sunlight pierced through the gray clouds, bringing with it hope and light. Ethan stood up and turned off his computer. Work was waiting. There were still many old houses out there, many forgotten stories waiting to be heard, waiting to be healed. And he knew he was ready. Thank you for your interest and for listening to the channel story. Please support the channel by like the video if you enjoyed it. Comment with your thoughts on the story and its ending. Share this video with your friends and family. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next thrilling horror story. Thank you all for listening.